G'day crew. In this episode I'm going to be running in my new motor. That sounds pretty boring, but it doesn't have to be. Because I can only travel slowly, I can have a couple of trolling rods out, although I don't expect very much from them since I'll be varying my speed a lot. What I can do though is look for new ground and show you guys some old ground that I know about. Travelling slowly is ideal for finding new ground to fish, and the opportunity shouldn't be wasted. So that's mainly what I'm going to show in this video, some of the ground that I went over. Most of it's not new to me, but it might be to you. This first section is the area around Myora Light. As you can see from the PBG colouring on the map and the 3D view in the lower right hand corner, there's a fair bit of structure down there. You can see some of it in the 2D view, but the extent of it isn't as obvious as it is in the 3D view because the 2D beam is conical and very narrow compared to the 120 degree wide 3D beam. On the map you can see some isolated structure in the PBG colouring further along, but we won't be passing over that today. I just mention it in case you want to have a look for it yourself. I'm just going to concentrate on this area around Myora Light using the Navionics map. The contour lines show that there's some structure down there, but they don't show very much detail. Even though they don't show very much detail, it's still important to understand them and how they work, because they can give you a starting point to begin your search for looking for new ground. This is a 2D overlay of the 3D bathymetry data. This gives a much better picture of the structure on the bottom, albeit still a 2D visualization. You can clearly see the depth changes from the shallow reds down through the blues to the violet tinges in the deepest areas. I think this helps to pinpoint the areas where you want to look for the fish. Now, quite often this is a little bit up current from the actual structure, but occasionally it's in the eddies behind it. And this is a 3D view of the same area. I'll increase the vertical exaggeration to make it easier to see the individual pieces of structure initially. And now an orbit around it so you get to see it from all directions. This 3D view makes it easy to pick individual structure that might otherwise be missed. Notice that the compass rose at the top right rotates so that you can orientate yourself with the view that you're seeing. Pause the video if you want to see more detail. Now I'll reduce the vertical exaggeration back to normal and adjust the viewing angle so you can get a truer perspective on the actual structure. The vertical exaggeration makes it easier to pick out individual bits of structure, but I find it's also useful to see it in a more real-world perspective. I think that gives me a better idea of what I'm looking at when I'm out on the water. And in case you're new to this area, I'll just also say that around Myora Light is fairly heavily fished. The procedure to break in the engines starts off by running it for 5 minutes to warm it up at the dock, then 15 minutes idle in gear, followed by an hour and 3/4 below 3000 RPM. The instructions for running in the Suzuki didn't explicitly say to vary the throttle setting while running it in, but I did, simply because I've been told to do that on other engines and I couldn't see any harm. Apart from varying the speed, messing with my trolling that is. After that, it's 8 hours below 4000 RPM, and again I varied the speed. I ended up doing a little over 8 hours on this trip, so I have another couple of hours to do to complete the initial 10 hours run-in. After that, they recommend another 10 hours with no more than 5 minutes at a time at wide open throttle. That isn't much of a challenge for me because I usually aim to cruise around the 4000 RPM mark anyway. I give it the occasional burst at least once every trip above that just to clean the plugs out, I don't know whether a 4-stroke needs it, but doesn't do any harm. So basically, after the next 2 hours, it's business as usual for me. I've got one up. Well, I was busy playing, but it's only a Grinner, I think. If he's anything. No, something hit it and didn't hook. Okay. Go back and try again. This section is still in the Rainbow Channel, north from Myora and west of the Wallen banks. I'll play the video segment through on fast forward so you can see what I saw on the sounder. Admittedly, it will be a bit harder for you to see it on fast forward, but you can pause it if you want to. As expected, the 2D view does show some structure, but seeing the extent of it is best done in the 3D view on the bottom right. Looking at the contour lines in the Navionics fishing chart, you can see the drop-offs and a couple of areas that look like they might be structure. If all you have is the Navionics charts, then these are the areas where you would want to start searching with your sounder. Overlaying the 2D view of the 3D bathymetry makes it much easier to see that there is structure down there that is worth investigating. The drop-offs on each side are quite steep, and you can see that the structure on the bottom in the deepest part of the channel. And there's even more structure at the northern end where it starts to shallow up. Looking at it in 3D, I'll do the same again. I'll just zoom in a bit first and increase the vertical exaggeration to make the smaller structure more visible initially. I've got to move it a little bit to centre it now and start an orbit so you can see it from all angles. Don't forget the compass at the top right corner to orientate yourself. Finally, reducing the vertical exaggeration back to normal and changing the viewing angle so it's more akin to something you're familiar with, like looking at the ground topology from the top of a nearby hill. And this orbit gives you a real-world view of the structure. As optimistic as it sounds, I still have the trolling rods out. Even though I'm varying the speed a few knots up and down, it's true what they say. You have to be in it to win it, and the rods won't do any good sitting in the cabin. The last section of the Rainbow Channel that I'm going to discuss is this area off Amity. It's another deeper area with some very steep drop-offs, particularly along the island side. Fishing along the drop-offs along the island side can be very good, but it's a bit difficult to get in there at times in close due to the number of locals lined up fishing from the shore. Now, you can't blame them for that. There's been a lot of very good fish taken by shore-based anglers along this area. Once again, you can see structure on the 2D sounder, but it's on the 3D screen that you get the best sense of what is down there. I'll just mention that the PBG colouring that you can see on the map has been built up over many trips and a lot of fuel. The coverage of the 3D beam is 120 degrees, so 60 degrees either side of the transducer. The circumference of a circle is 2 pi r, so at 20 metres deep the circumference is roughly 126 metres. And since there's 360 degrees in a circle, that means the arc length is 42 metres, or 1/3 of the circumference. What the 3D beam actually measures width-wise is the chord of the arc, so a little bit less than the 42 metres arc length. And that's a very long-winded way of saying that the width of the beam is approximately twice the depth of the water. Having 3D sonar certainly makes it doable, but it still needs quite a lot of effort to get really good bathymetry maps. Again, looking at the Navionics fishing chart, the contours give you some idea of what is down there, and should trigger the idea that you need to investigate the area in more detail, but it doesn't tell the full story. Again, overlaying the 2D view of the 3D bathymetry gives you a better idea of what areas might be more productive. There's a lot of undulations and little bits of structure in the area that are worth investigating, particularly along the eastern and northern sides. The eastern side has the steepest drop-offs, and I've already mentioned the fishing potential there, if the locals haven't got the shoreline crowded. But there are areas a little bit further out from the shore that are also worth a look. I haven't heard of tuskies being caught there from a boat, but I have heard reports of land-based catches. So if you don't have any better places to try, this might be worth a shot. Looking at it in 3D using the same format that we've previously used. Note the steepness of the drop-off along the island side to the east. This also highlights the structure at the northern end. I'll just leave this one play through. I can spot check the depth at various places just to see how pronounced this structure is, and while a lot of it isn't huge, it doesn't need to be to attract fish. I know of spots offshore where the difference in depth is only about a metre between the structure and the surroundings, and yet fish can be found there more often than not. What I want to convey here is that just because a piece of structure is small, don't overlook it as a potential fishing spot. That also means that you need to watch your sounder like a hawk in order to find those little gems that produce the fish. Small bits of structure are hard to see at the best of times, and the faster you travel, the smaller they're going to look on your sounder. So the best time to find them is when you're going slow, especially when you're trolling. I trolled across behind the bar for a bit, as there are often mackerel there, but not so on this occasion. Either that or my speed changes every few minutes put them off. My plan was to move into the Rous next, and since the top end of the Rous is a green zone, I needed to pull my lines in until I was past it. And since I'd well and truly exceeded the hours where I was restricted to below 3000 RPM, this was also my opportunity to get up close to 4000 RPM to transit the zone through the marked channel. Being outside the green zone put me at the Rous Knob. I've covered this area in detail in other videos, but I will mention it again. As you can see from the marks on my screen, I've found it a very productive area over the years. There's a bit of structure here and a steep drop-off into deeper water. You can see the structure in the PBG colours on the chart, as well as in the 2D and 3D sounder screens. The current swirls around this structure a lot, and in all the time I've been fishing it, I don't think I've ever done 2 consecutive drifts that take me over the same spot, even though I've started the drifts as nearly as possible from the same spot. The current just seems to change all the time. Because of the current, these days I prefer to just spot lock somewhere and be done with it. A quick look at the contour lines in the Navionics fishing chart shows the drop-offs, but that's all that's really obvious here. Having said that, don't forget that it's a starting point. You can sound around here and find all sorts of other interesting things. Provided, of course, that you can read your sounder and understand exactly what it's telling you. And once again, this is a 2D overlay of the 3D bathymetry data for the whole area. This isn't quite as informative as the other overlays that we've previously looked at because of the size of the area and the range of depth that it contains. It's like any map, really. The larger the scale, the less detail you see. I'll zoom in on some of the more important features later, but first I want to show you the 3D view of the whole area. I do this by drawing a marquee around the area that I want to view in 3D. That opens the 3D window, which I can then maximise to get the best view. Now keep in mind this is a large area that we're looking at, and the features will not stand out as much as they did in the previous views. You will also notice lots of strange structure at the eastern end, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But just now, I'll let this play through. Okay, now I'll explain what I call the pseudo-structure that you are seeing at the eastern end of the Rous Knob. You can see that there's some darker red lines crisscrossing the eastern end of the Rous Knob. These are what are responsible for the ghost structure that you see in 3D. If I put my cursor on an area that's not covered by these crisscross lines, I can read the depth of the original bathymetry data. That shows that the depth at that spot was originally 9.5 metres. The crisscross lines are newer bathymetry data that I've gathered on later trips. Moving the cursor over one of the crisscross lines, which represent the latest bathymetry data from that area, you can see that the depth is now only 1.5 metres. And those two spots I just measured are not very far apart. And to borrow a phrase from Professor Julius Sumner Miller, why is that so? And the reason is that the sandbank has been shifting westward over the years and has filled up what used to be a deeper hole, or much wider deep hole, at the end of the knob. This 3D view shows what this means in real terms. The crisscross lines that you saw in the previous stills are the raised tracks that you see here at the eastern end in this still from the 3D view. The sandbanks out around the bar move quite a lot. Sometimes I've noticed that they've moved a bit from one trip to the next. The sandbanks further into the bay do move, but generally not as much or not as fast, as there isn't as much current to push them around. I don't visit all that many places around the bay on a regular basis, certainly not regular enough to notice a small movement over time, but some, like this one, I do visit more than most. Anyway, what I wanted to demonstrate here is that when mixing historical records with current data, you can be misled into thinking the structure where there is none, simply because the sand shifted. Before I finish with the Rous Knob, I'll just play this orbit of the section we've just been speaking about. The 3D view is great for evaluating structure, but you do need to keep an eye out for where old and new data are mixed, particularly if the topology has shifted a little bit. It's usually pretty easy to spot it because the newer data shows as a track line with a different depth to the surroundings. It may be higher or lower, but it is noticeably different. I'll just let this finish playing. Party Grinner.
Oh, it's a second Grinner. Oh, is that weed? No, it's Grinner. Second Grinner, and this one didn't even have the decency to pop the board up, so I knew he was there. So he's been getting dragged around dead for a long time. That was a total waste of time then, having that right out trolley with him on it.
I did a little bit more trolling after this, and then we headed down to Horseshoe Bay at Peel for a quick swim and some lunch before picking up the crab pots and heading home. When I pull into the beach, I like to reverse in, then I can just jump off the back of the boat and take the rear anchor onto the shore, and that holds the boat in reasonably shallow so that my wife can get on and off easily. Having an electric winch on the front anchor makes it a lot easier because I can drop that anchor out, reverse in towards the beach and just let the anchor out until I'm in shallow enough, and then I cut the engine, jump off and take the rear anchor in. Pretty simple operation really, and it makes it simpler for the girls on board who aren't keen on jumping into water up to their waist to wade in, and also keeps my boat off the sand, which I generally don't like to put a fiberglass boat on the sand if I can avoid it. It doesn't matter how careful you are, the sand acts like sandpaper and it will scratch the gel coat wherever it touches. Not to mention the possibility of hidden rocks at areas that you're not familiar with.
Oh, I've got a couple. I do. I think we've got two keepers and one maybe, and a female. Oh, I've got tubs handy. I might just tip them out in that tub. Thank you. Yeah, I think this one might be small. Oh, no, he's not. Well, the others are definitely legal then. It's just this feisty female to throw back.
Oh, how do you know it's a female?
There's that big wide thing there. And that's the male there, not a narrow one.
Okay.
Plus the colouring, I should have showed you the colouring. But you see how they got this nice blue on them?
Yes.
Females don't have that.
Oh,
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yep. Oh, don't you get out of there. Now you can get out. Oh, well, that's a feed for us. That's 4 crabs.
I didn't get any fish, but then again that was more hope than expectation, given that I was running the engine in at the time. I did manage to get one lucky coral crab, or unlucky, depending on whose point of view you want to take. Then on the last pot I scored 3 nice bucks. Now $3 in a pot for 5 or 6 hours soak doesn't sound like much, and it's not, but it does indicate to me that I'm getting closer to finding out where they are. I have to say I was a little bit surprised about that last pot, because I hadn't dropped any pots there for several years. I guess no one else has either, and the population has bounced back a bit. Now my next mission is to drop pots at different depths in that area and see if I can find a larger concentration of them. And with the engine nearly run in, I think I can plan to do some serious fishing next time I get out on the water. Looking at the weather forecast, that'll be a little over a week away because the weather doesn't look all that good. In the meantime, I do have some other videos to put up, but I am looking forward to the next fishing video. Until then, good fishing.